Hello, welcome back. It's Charlotte. So today I wanted to share a little bit about some books. I'm going to share some books that I've recently finished that I enjoyed. Not everything. I'm not going to share all the books. Sometimes there's books that I just want to keep to myself or that I don't really want to talk about or whatnot. But out of the books that I've recently finished reading that I would like to share with you, either that I just recently finished in the last, little while, last few months, books that I am currently reading because I notoriously keep huge stacks of books next to my bed, a ridiculous amount of books that I read at the same time, and also some books that I want to read soon. And before I get into it, I just want to explain a little bit about my book personality or like my reading personality. First of all, like when I was talking about the books that I read, like how I read a lot of books at the same time, a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot of topics that will be simultaneously interesting me. And I always have I need to have a nonfiction book and a fiction book on hand. So I will have a book that is more, nonfiction, so that's more educational. And then I will have a book that's more of like a story, right? So it doesn't have to be fiction. It can be like a memoir, but, story based. And I will alternate between the two often, like in the daytime. If I'm reading in the daytime, I'll read something that's more nonfiction, but I keep my stories for nighttime reading. That's usually what I do. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's just what I tend to lean towards. That feels like a good balance for me. And I enjoy so many books, but I enjoy a lot of memoirs. I would say that memoirs are one of my favorite kinds of books to read. I like novels as well, but I guess I would say novels that either are, drama novels, like nothing, I want to be impacted by the story that I'm reading. I want to read something that's about the inside interior life of a person, which is why I love memoirs. So a lot of the novels I like tend to be, fictional accounts of people and their lives as well. I don't really read, romance novels or sci-fi novels. I'm not opposed to reading those. However, those are not my go-tos. I used to read when I was younger a lot of horror and thriller. Like those were my go-to guilty pleasure books that I would just devour. Not so much anymore. I have read some thrillers in the last couple of years, but they're just not as satisfying as they used to be. I don't know if it's that I've changed or that my tastes have changed, or if it's just that I haven't read the right thrillers, you know what I mean? So I'd say that probably the last good thrillers I've read are definitely Stephen King novels, but I've tried reading some of the more modern thrillers that you can buy kind of in the bargain bins and stuff, and they're okay, but they don't captivate me. They're not believable, I guess is the thing. They don't feel believable a lot of the time, and I do think it has to do with the writing. So there you go. I think it's not for nothing that Stephen King would have been the last good thriller I read, because Stephen King he's a pretty great writer and really knows how to bring characters alive. Yeah, so that's a little bit of my reading history: memoirs, thrillers. I really, really love educational books as well, especially health-related books, psychology books, philosophy. I definitely read a lot of self-help as well, though it can get really redundant and derivative a little bit, and also it's kind of oversaturated, the whole self-help world, and that's at best. At worst, a lot of it can be a little bit of spiritual bypassing, which I'll get into with one of the books. But I still love all that content. I still love reading those books, and I've also started reading a little bit more spirituality books, religious books, even though I consider myself very religiously ambiguous, I guess. I definitely wasn't raised religious. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself religious either, but I'm definitely not an atheist either. And I'm not an agnostic either. I used to consider myself agnostic, although I don't think I even really understood what it truly meant. So yeah, that's a little bit of what I like. I like science books too. There's a lot of books I like. I'm pretty eclectic in my taste, but mainly, I guess, what it comes down to is I don't usually read to escape. I usually read to delve deeper. So that's why it tends to either be like educational books that like are helping me understand something about myself or the world, or and exactly that as well for my fiction reads or my memoirs. So I think that is what kind of determines what I end up picking up as books. And also I have a very extensive library. I don't know how many books I have, but I definitely have more books than I have perfume. You know what I mean? I have an extensive perfume collection. I have a lot of books. I have hundreds of books, and I also read a lot of books from the library. So what I enjoy having is a lot of books on hand that I've never read. So I think some people can't relate to that, or like some people don't understand why you would have books you haven't read, or like why would you get more books if you have books you haven't read. But for me, I grew up around a lot of books. I definitely have like a bibliophile family. I grew up, my grandparents, my whole family had a lot of books. And so I grew up just being able to peruse libraries and pick what I want to read based on my mood, based on what I'm going through in my life at different times. And one of the things I noticed for myself was that one book, could really be speaking to me one year or in one season of my life or one point in my life, and then it just kind of not be relevant for me later on in my life, and vice versa. There's books that I've just kind of were just kind of like shadows and ghosts in my library or my family's library that I never really paid attention. And then when they became important for me to read, they just kind of stood out in my library, and I was so grateful that they were there. And I understood that, even though they didn't spark any curiosity for years beforehand, it wasn't the right timing. So I really like having that. I like having a lot of books around me, and to this day, that is what happens. There's a lot of books in my library that I have, and I wait for the right time to read them. It's not necessarily when I buy them, and sometimes it's books that I will pick up like secondhand, and I think, oh, I might want to read that one day, and I wait for that spark that pulls me towards that book, basically. And yeah, I think my favorite part of that has been those amazing moments when there's a book that I just, I've literally been moving around with me for the past 20 years, and, that didn't seem that interesting, and I would sometimes consider, getting rid of it, or why am I keeping that? And one day something happens, or something happens in my life, or I see something differently, and suddenly that book is like the book I need to read. So yeah, I think that's really cool about having a library at home. So yeah, I have a lot of books at home, probably half of which I've read, and I also read a lot of books at the library. And some of those books, sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I had the actual copy with me at home, but I figure that if I want to read it again, I can either get it from the library again, or I'll pick it up if it feels right at some point to add to my library. So today I just want to share with you some of the books that I have recently read, and that I have been reading, and that I want to read. So let's start off with some books that I've recently read. Okay, so I may have a lot or nothing much to say about these. We will see. This was How to Grow Up by Michelle T. Is it Michelle T? Yeah, Michelle T. As you can see, I never took off this bargain book $5 price tag here. But when I see like a memoir for a bargain price, I just pick it up. If I was, in the mood to buy a book or something to begin with, because even if I just find people so interesting, that it's rare that I absolutely can't get through a memoir. So this memoir is by Michelle T, which I had no idea who this was, to be honest. The title definitely, attracted me, How to Grow Up, who is this, fully adult person writing a memoir about how to grow up. And then the back here, a gutsy, wise memoir, and essays from a writer praised as impossible to put down. Okay, impossible to put down, wise, memoir, essays, I was already pulled in. So anyway, I picked this up, and it actually took me a long time to read this. Like, I started reading it a few years ago, and then I just didn't get into it, or I started something else and that pulled me in more and I put it down. But then recently I was like, oh, I should start that again. And of course it had been so long since I'd started it that I was like, okay, I need to start from the beginning again. Let me try to get into a position where I can still film kind of with and still be comfortable or something. Let's see. So yeah, because I want to be able to open it if there's anything. Okay, so let me just see. Okay, I like looking at the table of contents, so I'm just gonna, okay. So here you have the table of contents. You have 1, you deserve this. 2, fashion victim. 3, my $1,100 birthday apartment. 4, I have a trust fund from God, and so do you. 5, beware of sex and other rules for love. 6, how to break up. 7, too cool for school. 8, the baddest Buddhist. 9, getting pregnant with Michelle T. 10, ask not for whom the wedding bell tolls. 11, you can't fire me, I quit. 12, what would young Michelle do? 13, eat me. 14, I'm so vain. And 15, confessions of a gym rat. So I like these little titles that just kind of give away a little bit of the topics that might be covered in her memoir. But generally speaking, this was an enjoyable read. It wasn't particularly it was not groundbreaking for me or particularly impactful. This was just enjoyable. It made me laugh a couple times, which is kind of rare for a book to do. Maybe it's just because of the books I choose. But yeah, it was enjoyable to read, and I don't highly recommend it or anything, but if you like memoirs and you see it and you would like to read about someone who, is having a hard time kind of deciding to become a more responsible adult, I guess, someone who's going through her 30s, and I mean she's in her 40s now. I think she wrote this in her 30s, her late 30s, I think. But yeah, someone who's just basically, going through the pains of growing up and shares some vulnerable stuff and shares herself in a very kind of, humble way, shares herself in a way where she shares her vulnerabilities, the things that make her imperfect, I'm so bad at saying this. But yeah, it was not bad, it does go through a few things. She covers some topics like drugs and alcohol addiction, as well as financial stuff, growing up and financially trying to be more independent or more responsible. She also covers a lot of relationship stuff and a lot of self-reflection, of course, which is, my favorite part of a memoir. And she also shares I think she has another memoir after this that shares her conception journey, or trying to conceive journey, if I'm not mistaken. Or is that just in this book? She does share a little bit. No, sorry. She does share about that in here, but I think she might also have another book that specifically only shares about that. So anyway, if that interests you, if those things interest you, you might want to read it. You might want to pick it up, but it's not an amazing memoir or anything to me. I enjoyed reading this, and I could have easily, not bought this. I could have read it from the library, and if I had gotten it from the library, I would have enjoyed reading it, but then I wouldn't have thought I was going to read it again one day and that I needed it in my permanent library. You know what I mean? So that's How to Grow Up by Michelle T. Then we have Lullabies for Little Criminals by Heather O'Neill. And this is a book that I've had for a long time on my to be read sort of shelf, that I've wanted to read. It is kind of critically acclaimed and renowned here in Canada, specifically here, like the writer is from my city, Montreal, and the novel itself is happening in Montreal. And actually, when I first read about this novel and like knew about it, I thought it was a memoir, but it's a novel. I don't know if any of it is based loosely on her life or someone else's life or anything, but it definitely feels very, very, very real. Like it could be real, you know? And it's about this girl's passage into teenagehood and adulthood, but living a very kind of traumatic childhood with a lot of neglect and other kinds of abuses. So definitely trigger warning, I guess, for people who don't want to read about that. But for a lot of people who also have been through those things, reading other people's stories can be really validating and healing and make you feel less alone, which is the case for me. I don't really shy away from those kinds of books unless I really don't want to read about it or I want to distance myself from it, which, you know, does happen sometimes. But as a whole, I get inspired by seeing how other people are able to process and persevere in their lives and ultimately how to live through really difficult situations and events. So I highly recommend this book. I do like Heather O'Neill as a writer. This is not the first novel that I've read of hers. She also wrote The Lonely Hearts Motel. Was it? The Lonely Hearts, it's not the Lonely Hearts Club, the Lonely Hearts Motel, I think. I'll put the name on the screen if I think I might have forgotten. And that one is definitely more fantasy-like, but it's just as, like, I could tell that she was the writer because the way she writes is very similar, of course, but also her themes. That was a really good novel, and it was kind of out of my usual reading material. It was set in the past, I think like in the early 1900s or something, but it was still set in Montreal. So it was also very interesting to read through a novel set in my city, but, you know, through this person's lens. It was really interesting to read that. And that one is not a light read either. There is some heavy stuff in that one. There's also a deep love story in that one, which again, I'm not a big love story person, but that novel was really good. And this one, Lullabies for Little Criminals, like I said, I forget if it goes into her adulthood. I think so. Let me just remember. Or if it's just like her teenagehood or like early adulthood. I'm already forgetting the end, you know? But I think the most sort of impactful part of this book, aside from how much you feel for the girl, for the protagonist in this novel, is just how you see her perception of herself change through time as she gets older, and also her perception of the abuses she's dealt with and the perpetrators of those abuses, how her perception of these events and these people changes over time, and the way it's described by Heather O'Neill. Well, Heather O'Neill is a really good writer. She has some passages in her, and that's what's similar to the other book she has, that are just kind of like you wanna highlight them and cite them somewhere, because they just stop you in your tracks. You'll just read it over again and you'll be like, they'll either make you want to cry or just kind of contemplate life, or you know what I mean? So yeah, very impactful writer and a really great novel. So I highly recommend this one if you don't mind, you know, the harsher elements of life being described in this novel. Then, along the same lines of a memoir, we have Too Pretty to Be Good by Lindsay Byron. And this was so good. I loved this memoir so much. And Lindsay Byron is someone that I actually started following on social media, and I started reading her Substack, and I just love her writing. I just think she's an incredible writer, and just like a very raw, vulnerable, honest writer. I don't need the fancy writing. I want something that, you know, stops me in my tracks. Like I read that and I'm like, wow, I can't believe you wrote that out loud. I can't believe you went there, you know. That's And then on top of that, of course, she does write beautifully. So those two together are just very captivating to me. And this was an incredible memoir. I read this, I like devoured this in a few days, and it was one of those books that I was just like, oh, I'm sad that it's finished. But basically, to give a little bit of a synopsis, Too Pretty to Be Good is her life story. And Lindsay Byron became a stripper or exotic dancer or dancer, however you want to call it. I think she calls herself both a dancer and a stripper in here. And she also became a writer and eventually got her PhD, and then lived kind of like that double life of living, you know, the dancer life and also the university professor life. And this is not so much just that veneer on top of what her life is, but the deeper enmeshments of these professions and how they impacted herself and how they came from, wow, I'm not saying this properly, but basically how, man, I don't know how to say things without like revealing too much, you know what I mean? I don't want to reveal anything, but in this memoir, she examines her relationship to her body, her relationship to sex, her relationship to men, her very complex relationships to the women in her life, and the generational sort of trauma kind of woven into her mother's, grandmother's, aunts' lives, and how she tried to really come out of that as, I guess, someone who's really in charge and in control of her own life. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it without revealing anything, you know, about the book, but just a really, really eloquent writer, really great writer, impactful story, and definitely very entertaining too. Like, very interesting life, very interesting take, and does not shy away from being brutally honest, which is what I love. Those are the kinds of writers I really love. And actually, her writing reminded me a little bit of one of my other favorite writers, which is Maria Hornbacher. I hope I'm saying her name right. Who's another writer who writes similarly to Lindsay Byron. Like, and I say that because it's rare for me to read that kind of writing. Yeah, these are my favorite writers. People who do not shy away from talking about the hard things, who speak very candidly about things that I think people don't even like admit to themselves, let alone write down in books. And they lay everything out. Like, you could judge her so much for what she writes about, or not even just events in her life, but just even the way she is, her opinions, the way she lives her life, her feelings about her life, about everything in her life. There's so much room to judge her, but that's what sets her free too. You know what I mean? It's that she's just unabashedly herself, and I think she's amazing. She's awesome. You can check her out on social media if you want. Lindsay Byron. I think she's LuxATL on Instagram and on Substack too. Go check her out if you want. She actually has put a few excerpts from her memoir on her Substack and sometimes in her captions on Instagram. But yeah, I love her. I love this book. I love her writing, and I think she's an inspiration. I think she's an inspiring example of someone who's just kind of like has created their own path and has not just tried to copy someone else's path in life. Like, she's a writer, and she also leads workshops and retreats to like help women, to teach women how to like strip basically and dance, but really in a way that's like to reclaim yourself and your sexuality and your sensuality. And I think she's awesome. Yeah, I really, really, really loved this book, Too Pretty to Be Good. Then next up, I have a couple books I want to talk about at the same time. This is No Bad Parts, Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model by Richard C. Schwartz, and foreword by Alanis Morissette, which I didn't know, but Alanis Morissette is very like involved in trauma work and stuff, because yeah, I didn't know that. Discover your multifaceted mind. But okay, I'm not gonna explain what the internal family systems model is, because I'm sure I'm gonna make tons of mistakes. But essentially, No Bad Parts comes down to, and here I am still trying to do it. But what I will say is, like, you have yourself, which is your intemporal self that is in the present, that is led from the heart that can make sound decisions based on your present self and faculties. But we have all of these parts basically kind of stuck on us. No, not stuck on us, but like we have all of these parts. That's the multifaceted mind, and they tend to come from different periods in your life, and a lot of them come from your younger self, and they tend to get stuck in that time. Especially if you have trauma and stuff, you will have parts that come from those periods in your life. A lot of these parts are defensive parts, and a lot of these parts are stuck in the past. And when you get stuck in these parts, you're reacting as if that past is happening in the present. This is one aspect of no bad parts, okay? But the idea of no bad parts is that all of these parts are just looking to be heard and seen, and that we have a tendency to want to banish them. And by banishing them, they just come back and take control of your life, and that all of these parts, if you were to listen to them and hear them and learn to get to know them, not only would that help heal you, but you would also be able to be more present in your present grounded self and not get kind of inundated or overwhelmed or controlled by one of these parts, which are your younger selves that come and might want to take control of your life, like of yourself. And it does sound a little bit like, okay, as if you have multiple personality disorder. And he goes into that at the beginning, like, yeah, we kind of do have, it's not multiple personality disorder, but we do have these different parts of ourselves that could be seen in that kind of way, actually. And the idea is that a lot of people live their entire lives in their parts, in their defenses, without being fully present in their, grounded self. And so because of that, they are not able to be their full selves, but also they're not able to make choices for themselves that would help their life. They're not able to be their own best advocate. They're not able to move through life feeling like they're in integrity. And so this is really, if you have trauma, if you have childhood trauma or anything like that, this is a good read. It's not like the best book I've ever read on trauma. I would say that would be maybe The Body Keeps the Score, and what's the other one? Healing and Trauma. Oh, I forget what it's called. But I will put them up. And then of course there's other books as well. But this is a really good book to read. It is a little bit more simple than some of those other books. It has a lot of work inside. Like there'll be sections where you have work to do on yourself, either in a book or thinking it through. See, like here, exercises, your turn, exercise, getting to know a protector. So a protector is like a part. Here he talks about no bad parts, the self. Parts are not their burdens. Let me see if I can show you the table of contents. It's really hard to describe something too like this when you're just kind of, it's not like I have an outline or anything, or I'm just kind of winging it, coming up with on the spot what I got out of this book. And so much of it is hard to pinpoint, you know what I mean? You absorb a lot, but you don't necessarily remember exactly what you absorbed. So part 1, internal family systems. Chapter 1, we're all multiple. And you have your exercise of getting to know a protector and then mapping your parts. Chapter 2, why parts blend. Exercise unblending and embodying. And he also shares a session with a patient called Sam. Chapter 3, this changes everything. Exercise dilemma meditation, and exercise working with a challenging protector. Chapter 4, more on systems, an exercise of daily IFS meditation. Chapter 5, mapping our inner systems. Session 2, Mona. Part 2, self-leadership. Chapter 6, healing and transformation. Exercise the path and accessing the self through unblending. Chapter 7, the self in action. And session 3, Ethan and Sarah. And chapter 8, vision and purpose. Exercise fire drill and exercise sad person meditation. I forget what that is. Chapter 9, life lessons and tour mentors. Exercise, Advanced Parts Mapping and Working with Triggers. Chapter 10, The Laws of Inner Physics. Exercise, Advanced Protector Work. And Session 4, Andy. Chapter 11, Embodiment. Session 5, TJ. And Exercise, Body Meditation. Closing thoughts. So I think this is definitely worth reading if you've been doing trauma work for any length of time, or if you're completely new to it. If you're completely new to it, it might actually be groundbreaking for you, and you might be like, it might be like big light bulb moments for you. You know what I mean? For me, it was more subtle than that, but it really added some nuance to what I already had learned and had kind of assimilated in my understanding of trauma, and also in my tools for my own healing work. So this was definitely worth reading. What I thought was really interesting is that while I was reading this book, I was also reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And this is a book, one of those books that I think this came out in the late 90s or early 2000s, somewhere around then. And my grandparents had this book. So I've literally been seeing this on the shelf for over 20 years. And I picked it up about 10 years ago and I couldn't stand it. I was like, yeah, no, this is, I can't read this. It was completely repulsive. Not repulsive, but like did not resonate at all for me. And I found it kind of annoying, like really annoying. But I recently started reading it again, I guess in the last year. I took my time reading it. I really did. And you'll even see, like, this is a book that I have, I think, yeah, I have highlighted a lot and written notes in. And so, and yes, this is my own copy, so I don't mind. I like that I can go back and look back on what I thought was important in the book. And what I thought was interesting is, the power of now is kind of like a modern sort of Buddhist teaching, a very kind of basic Buddhist sort of kind of teaching guide book. And a lot of what he kind of repeats over and over again, which is, what you do in meditation and so on, is just noticing, just letting things be and not judging them, and just observing and witnessing. And I was reading that while I was reading No Bad Parts, which a lot of No Bad Parts and the healing in your parts is about just witnessing those parts and letting them be, and letting them kind of be their full selves in a safe space. And here, this is about letting things be, not trying to change them or control them. A lot of that has to do with whatever comes up in you during a meditation, and not reacting to it, but also not judging it mainly, and just letting it move through you. And a lot of the parts stuff has to do with letting the parts take up their space that they need to take part of in yourself as well, so that they have less of a hold on you too. So very, very different modalities, and not necessarily speaking about the same thing, but so much of what they were speaking about, sometimes they were speaking about the same thing. So it was really interesting to just be kind of seeing these things through two different lenses. And I thought that was interesting. Totally different points of view, though, you know what I mean? Like different ways of speaking about and exploring the self, but both of them are about, ultimately reckoning with the self, with the multifaceted self. So I thought that was really interesting. And ultimately, I did get something out of The Power of Now. I'm glad I read it, and it was not insufferable the way it was the first time I read it. But I totally understand if it is, if you read it and you're like, I can't do this, total turn off, because it was like that for me too. But it depends on the time in your life. If it's right for you to read, it might resonate, it might not. If it's not, for me, I was able to read it and get something out of it, enjoy it, because at this point in my life, I've already, I guess, not that I'm enlightened, but there's a lot of things that I've kind of understood or come to terms with, I guess, in the last 10 years. And I'm 36 now. So I guess before that, there were certain things I hadn't understood yet that would have let me be, that would have allowed me to understand this in the way that I understood it now. And at the same time, though, there's a lot of material in here that I think one person can read and get a lot out of it, and it really impact their life in a positive way. And someone else could be reading the same thing and they could use it to completely spiritually bypass and avoid their life. Even though that's not what he's promoting at all. If anything, a few times he tries to address that and tries to make it clear that it's not licensed to spiritually bypass. I still feel like some people will read this and will spiritually bypass, I guess. But you can't control that, you know what I mean? You speak your language, you speak your truth, and people will always understand things the way they understand them through their own lens anyway. So, I mean, that's the challenge for writers too and communicators, is how can I communicate in a way that will be specific enough so that you don't kind of interpret things solely from your lens, but broad and general enough so that you will also be able to apply it to your life and to yourself. You know what I mean? So it's like a fine line there. And anyway, those are just my thoughts. There you go. So I'm glad I finally read The Power of Now, and I'm glad I have it in my library, and I'm glad that I highlighted it so that if I just want to peruse it again, I can just go over the parts that I highlighted that really either impacted me or that I wanted to think more about, or that made me think deeper about certain things. And same for No Bad Parts. I do think I highlighted a little bit in this book as well, but not as much. And apparently my highlighter was running out of ink. So yeah, like, what is that? Barely highlighted. But anyway, yeah, I highly recommend this book if you are in doing your own trauma work. And this too, if you want to spend less time kind of judging yourself and your process, and you want to access the present more, there is some useful stuff in there. Then after that, we have The Brave Learner, Finding Everyday Magic in Homeschool, Learning, and Life by Julie Bogart. And this is a library book. I have a few library books now coming up. And this was a book that I was pretty excited to read. There was really good reviews on it. Well, very mixed actually. And I am considering homeschool. It's something I'm really excited about. But I don't think you need to be homeschooling to read this book. You don't even necessarily have to have kids. Though I think if you have kids, it's a great book to read. And I really enjoyed this book. And it's actually a book that I enjoyed more and more as I got deeper into it. So the beginning was okay, it was fine. But I actually got more into it as it went on. And I think my favorite chapters were like the last few chapters. You have The Enchanted Landscape of Learning. Chapter 1, Enchanted Living, Creating the Context for Magic in Our Homes. Chapter 2, Sparks Fly, Igniting a Passion for Learning. Chapter 3, Magic Doors, Lessons from Monsters and Maps. Part 2, Casting the Spell, The Superpowers of Brave Learning. Chapter 4, The Four Forces of Enchantment, Surprise, Mystery, Risk, and Adventure. She's very she's very enthusiastic and excited about homeschooling, which is also very awesome and motivating to read. Just in general, like I say, you don't have to be homeschooling though. It's just like being involved with your children and having your children involved with your life. Like, if you just want to be more involved in your kids' lives, you know what I mean? This is an interesting book to read. The Four Capacities for Learning, Curiosity, Collaboration, Contemplation, and Celebration. Chapter 6, The Four Ports of Entry, Mind, Body, Heart, and Spirit. Chapter 7, Applying the Superpowers, Practical Help in Core Subjects. Part 3, Sustaining the Magic, Liberation from School, to schedule or not to schedule, that is the question. Chapter 9, House Schooling, Recruit Your Home to Help You Educate, and that pernicious topic, chores. Chapter 10, The Pixie Dust and Reasonable Expectations, Embracing Our Limits, and Awesome Adulting, Expanding Our Horizons, and Breaking the Spell and Rekindling the Magic, The Invisible Education, The Power of Family Dysfunction to Sideline Learning. Chapter 13, The Disenchanting Power of Doing It Right, The Dangers of Ideological Alignment and True Beliefism in Home Education. And Chapter 14, Reverse the Curse, How to Rekindle the Magic. So I really liked the whole book, and I especially liked part 3 and part 4. Yeah, basically. So I do recommend this book. This is a book that I might buy the copy to have in my home library, because I do think I might want to consult it again. Like I definitely like took a couple screenshots. She has a lot of tools in here as well, and systems that she shares. So it's very practical, but it's also very insightful. And it has also an element of storytelling too, based on, her own story. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I recommend it if you are homeschooling or contemplating homeschooling, or you just have kids and you want to feel more connected to them and be more involved in their learning and their growing up and their lives. So, The Brave Learner by Julie Bogart. Next, we have a memoir, again, from the library. This one I kind of wanted to buy for the longest time, but then I saw it at the library and I was like, I'm just gonna, I don't need to buy it right now. This is Jennette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died. And yes, very inflammatory title. I think that's what kind of caught most people's attention, and that's, as she describes in the book, that's what she, and in interviews, that is what she wanted. And this is the actress's, former actress, because now she's a writer and podcaster. The former child actress's account of her life growing up and basically her abusive childhood and coming out of that, her whole upbringing through that up until her early adulthood, I would say. This was a good book. I enjoyed it. I related to a lot of it too as well, even though our stories are not at all the same. But I related to a lot of the, I guess, like the gaslighting and all of the internal turmoil that abuse leads to. She explained very well that thing that happens when the person who's supposed to be taking care of you is also your abuser, and the way that you need them in the most primal sense, but they are also the most dangerous person to you simultaneously, and the kind of cognitive dissonance that creates in yourself. And so it's obviously a very enmeshed relationship, but it's also very hard to make that break as you become an adult and you start realizing all of the damage that was done and all of the abuse that happened, and how, first of all, how powerless you were to it, but also how you are the only person who is going to be able to admit to it. No one's going to tell you, or no one's going to be like saying, yeah, that you had an abusive childhood. Not really, you are the one who ultimately needs to grapple with it and admit to it and let go of that burden. And I think that's what she did too by calling this book the way she did, I'm Glad My Mom Died. And you don't get the sense that she hates her mom in the book, even though at the end she really does make it clear that she really can't love her the way that she, of course, loved and depended on her growing up. And it's really kind of a way of relieving herself of that final burden, I guess, with that title, I'm Glad My Mom Died. It's like you feel relief for her when she says that, if you read the book up until the end, because the whole book is not ever about talking about how she hates her mom at all. If anything, she tries to be everything for her mom, and that's what she is now needing to repair and heal because it was not good. But so yeah, if you've read it, let me know what you think too. But I definitely recommend this as a memoir, and also specifically for those who want to read a memoir that has to do with childhood trauma, but also child trauma that is mainly has to do with your mother, which is very specific. And I knew I had to read this book, and I'm glad I did. And I'm really glad that she wrote this book, that she finally expressed her truth. Yeah. And she made an impact. If you read the reviews, like, a lot of people related to her book and felt seen and heard by her writing her story as well. So yeah, definitely recommend this one. I'm glad my mom died. I also read, finally, also from the library, Britney Spears' The Woman in Me. This was definitely very interesting. I grew up during the Britney era, and I remember when I was in 5th grade and she just blew up, and she really was like the biggest star in the world. She really was. And I also, those early 2000 periods when like the tabloids were really vicious and terrible, that's the point when I was really invested in tabloids. Like, I went through this phase in my late teens where I would read In Touch and Star and all those tabloid magazines, and that's like the worst time. That was the worst time. It was terrible for these celebrities. And of course, that whole time tabloids were terrible with Britney Spears specifically too. And so it was very interesting to read this from her point of view, going through all of these years and things that I remember through the lens of reading it in tabloids, or also that time in history which just talked about women and women's bodies, and in a very different way. Not that it's better now, but it was just so obviously bad and debasing, and it was very confusing to see that as a young girl, you know. Like, I'm still kind of coming to terms with the fact that so much of what you see, the messaging you get when you're a teen girl, is how women are seen from the greater world, like other women, you know, that it's giving you an idea of what to expect for yourself as you grow older, what you can expect from the world, how the world will see you, how you are allowed to take up space or not take up space, how you're allowed to present yourself or not present yourself, what the repercussions are either way. You know, you're just kind of like, you're taking that all in when you're a child and when you're a teen. And it just brought me back there because, yeah, that was that time. Anyway, a lot of the book obviously is from those earlier years, but she does go in her later years, her more recent years. And this was a very interesting read for me. I'm glad she wrote this book. This was written by a ghostwriter, so not specifically her, but the ghostwriter wrote in such a way where I definitely thought it could have been her who wrote it. It sounded like she was just speaking to you. On the one hand, that means it was very believable and you really felt like she was speaking her truth. But on the other hand, the writing wasn't always very good. There were some parts that, you know, were just a little flat or could have gone a little more in depth. And then some parts that were just flat out, just kind of not good writing. You know what I mean? But that aside, the story is the king here. The story is king here. And it was her story to tell. And I'm glad she told it. And I'm glad I read it. So Britney Spears, The Woman in Me. If you were interested in reading her story and you haven't yet, definitely read it. And you can get it from, I would say, I'm not going to read this again, you know what I mean? I'm glad that I read it from the library and didn't necessarily buy it. Then next those are all the books that I've recently read. Now I'm going to show you some of the books that I am currently reading, and then I'll show you some of the books that I want to read. So this is a book, When Things Fall Apart, by Pema Chodron. Oh, I don't know how to say her name. Pema Chodron. Heart Advice for Difficult Times. And it says, the advice Chodron offers is radically different from other self-help prescriptions on the market. This book could serve you for a lifetime. And this is a book actually that was given to me by my cousin over a decade ago when I really did feel like my life was falling apart, when things were falling apart. And at the time, I was very thankful that she gave this to me, but I didn't read it at the time. I didn't have space. I was in a very, very angry space, actually. And I don't know. Yeah, it's not, I didn't have the space to read this at the time. And I just recently started reading it again. And I don't think that your life needs to be falling apart to read this. I think I did feel pulled to it when it, it says heart advice for difficult times. And because I remembered that my cousin had recommended to me and shared it with me, and I knew I was going to read it one day. You can see that I've highlighted again with that highlighter that doesn't highlight very well, or with pens. So I've really been enjoying this book. It is compelling. It is explaining things in a way that, like, explaining things that might be still kind of basic Buddhism principles, but in a way that's a little bit different, that's landing a little bit differently, that definitely is resonating with me and for me. So I am enjoying this. I'm not like halfway. Not even halfway. I'm not even halfway. Again, this is one, here I'm on chapter Hopelessness and Death. This is not something that I'm like barreling through, you know what I mean? Like, I will read a little part, and there's another book like that I'll share with you, and then I just kind of need to think about it a little bit, and then I'll come back a little bit for more, It's not something I'm trying to get through very fast or anything. I'll read you the table of contents. We have intimacy with fear, when things fall apart. This very moment is the perfect teacher. Relax as it is. It's never too late. Not causing harm. Hopelessness and death. 8 worldly dharmas. 6 kinds of loneliness. Curious about existence. Non-aggression and the 4 maras. Growing up. Widening the circle of compassion. The love that will not die. Going against the grains. Servants of peace. Opinions. Secret oral instructions. 3 methods for working with chaos. The trick of choicelessness. Reversing the wheel of samsara, and the path is the goal. So I do recommend this again for you, definitely if things feel like they're falling apart or you're going through a difficult time. But I think that this applies just for anyone who's just living a life and a self-examined life. I think this is worth reading, and yeah, I recommend this. Next, I am reading No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I Need to Hear. So this is a memoir, again from the library, and this is a memoir of a woman. This was in the past, like, she's no longer this age, but she had cancer. She got diagnosed with cancer, I think, when she was 35, and this is kind of like her journey through that, her diagnosis, and how, the existential crisis that kind of ensues, and the way it changed her life, the way it changed the way she lives her life, the way she sees time. And so I thought that was really interesting, and that's what kind of sparked my interest for this. I'm a little bit more than halfway through it, I think, now, and I am enjoying it. I would say that my favorite part has been, like, she has little lapses of, like, raw, honest truths, and I really love that, like these little nuggets that I really enjoy. There's some parts that I find, I don't know if it's just because I can't relate as much, but I find less interesting or just less relatable, I guess. But overall, it's very interesting. I especially like the way that she talks about time and how time changes when you know that you're basically running out of time. And that's the part that I find the most compelling and that I enjoy hearing her perspective on. From what I gather, she no longer has the cancer. Like, she's alive and well right now, from what I understand. Oh, that's an alarm I had set for myself. I hope I'm not wrong, but I'm pretty sure she's alive and well. But you definitely get the sense that she has, she's diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which is like the worst kind, right? And it's just funny because it's funny. It's terrible, but it's funny. At the beginning, when she is diagnosed and she asks how many stages there are of cancer, she's like, oh, what are lesions? What are you talking about? And he's like, tumors. We're talking about tumors. Oh, I said, embarrassed by another flood of tears because she's crying at this point. Right. And are there more than 4 stages of cancer? No. Okay, so I have the most cancer. I finished lamely. So it's just kind of like you are right there with her through these periods in life that no one hopes to ever have to go through, of course, but that many people do. And yeah, it's not my favorite memoir so far. I don't love it as much as like I thought I would, but I do, like I said, I like that part of her memoir. I love her perspective on time and how that's shifted, and I'm eager to see how that unwinds in her book, because I'm more than halfway through, but I still think that there's a lot that she might reveal in the memoir. And so if you want to read about this, like, I do think it's very confronting. I do think, like, I got this from the library, and like right away I wanted to read it. It's so kind of macabre. Like, I wanted to read it, like, partly because I was like, oh, she's my age and she's diagnosed with cancer. But also, she's my age and she was diagnosed with cancer. Like, do I really want to read that right now? You know what I mean? So I didn't read it right away. I didn't start reading it right away, and I was kind of scared of reading it. But at the same time, that's the whole point of reading it, because I'm like, well, she didn't know she would get cancer, and she was not ready to be diagnosed with cancer. You know what I mean? So no one's ready for that. And I like to read about people's vulnerable, real moments in life. So that's what this is, you know? So I finally was like, okay, it's okay. I can read about this without freaking out. Which I can so far. And yeah. So if that sounds good to you, definitely look for it, give it a read. But like I said, it's not my most highly recommended book or memoir so far. And another book I'm reading right now is, I am trying to slowly get through some classics that I have not read. I mean, there's so many to read, but I also have been neglecting reading any classics for years. So I want to get back to it. And one of them that I started reading last year is John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. And you guys, I didn't realize, first of all, that this was such a big book, because it doesn't look that big. But I realized it's just, the writing is pretty small. And actually it is big. It's almost 500 pages. So it is actually quite a big book. But this is hard for me to get through. Like, really, really hard. What keeps me reading it is, first of all, I don't like to give up. It's so rare that I will not finish a book. I might stop it for a long time and then come back to it, but I don't like giving up on books. And I think I'm I don't know. Oh, here I highlighted something. So I guess I'm past that. So I'm past the halfway mark, but that doesn't mean anything. There's still a lot left, and it feels a little bit like pulling teeth right now. It has its moments. There are periods, there are sentences that I love, that are poignant, that I want to kind of internalize and keep with me. But it's very long, and the language is very hard for me to get through. It's all most of it is dialogue, and it's dialogue in a heavy Southern accent that I have a hard time even understanding the way it's written sometimes. So for that reason, it's hard for me to read. It's hard for me to read. Sometimes I have to translate things in my head. Yeah, because of the accent, the way it's written. Because of that, it's kind of hard. But I do think it's an important book. That's mainly why I'm reading it, is because I do think it's an important book, both because of the writer and the content, but also the historical content, of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. And also culturally, artistically, it's also significant. So that's mainly why I'm reading it. But I was really expecting it to enjoy it so much more. And part of the reason I don't enjoy it is because of the dialogue. Like I said, I find the dialogue hard to read. I don't know if I can show you an example, but I'm more used to it now. But I don't know all like this, but I know it. He done a little bad thing, they hurt him. They hurt him, caught him, and hurt him, so he was mad. And the next bad thing he done was mad, and they hurt him again. And pretty soon he was mean mad. They shot at him like a varmint, and he shot back. And then they ran him like a coyote, and him a snapping and a snarling, mean as a lobo. And he was mad. He wasn't no boy or no man no more. He was just a walking chunk of mean mad. But the folks that knowed him didn't hurt him. He wasn't mad at them. Finally, they run him down and killed him. No matter how they say it in the paper how he was bad, that's how it was. She paused and she licked her dry lips, and her whole face was an aching question. See, I love that. Her whole face was an aching question. Like, he's a great writer, but that just gives you like a taste of his narration. But the dialogue I have trouble with. I got to know Tommy. Did they hurt you so much? Did they make you mad like that? So, yeah. And I think I may have seen the movie version when I was a kid, when I was younger, maybe even a kid, I don't know. But I don't remember it, so I want to get through it so that then I can also see the movie and kind of like see that dialogue and everything come alive. I also looked to see if I could find an audiobook version so that maybe I could read it while reading the audiobook, so I would have the dialogue that way, but I couldn't find it, so I could only find like audiobook summaries, which no way. So yeah, so I'm gonna keep reading this, but it is a painful read, you guys. Like, when I pick this up to read, it's definitely not to relax, really. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get through another 10, 15 pages, and I get something out of it, and like I'm following the story, but it's hard to follow the story, like I said. So yeah, there you go. That's one of the classics that I'm trying to get through that I'm not super on board with. We've got here, next we have The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. New Psychology of Love, Traditional Values, and Spiritual Growth. The Timeless Classic. So I didn't know this classic, but it was on my to be read list for a while. And this is the kind of book that I was perusing a bookstore and I picked up, and I loved the table of contents, and I'd read a little bit of inside, and I was like, okay, I really, really want to read this. I want to know what he has to say about these certain things. And of course, this is another one that I have highlighted a lot of passages. So I'm going to read you the table of contents because I love them in this book. So clearly laid out and talks about everything in life. You have 1, discipline, problems and pain, delaying gratification, the sins of the father, problem solving and time, responsibility, neurosis and character disorders, escape from freedom, dedication to reality, transference, the outdated map, openness to challenge, withholding truth, balancing, the healthiness of depression, renunciation and rebirth. Then you have part 2, love. This part is really interesting. I think I'm in the middle of love or at the end and started the next one, but I really like what he has to say about love as well. Love defined, falling in quote unquote love, the myth of romantic love, more about ego boundaries, dependency, catharsis without love, quote self-sacrifice, love is not a feeling, the work of attention, the risk of loss, the risk of independence, the risk of commitment, the risk of confrontation, love is disciplined, love is separateness, love and psychotherapy, the mystery of love. Then you have 3, growth and religion, worldviews and religion, the religion of science, the case of Kathy, the case of Martha, the case of Theodore, the baby and the bathwater, scientific tunnel vision. I definitely have not gone there. I'm in the love section. None of this is familiar to me, so I'm still in the risk. I'm in the risks, I think. Grace, part 4. The miracle of health, the miracle of the unconscious, the miracle of serendipity, the definition of grace, the miracle of evolution, the alpha and the omega, entropy and original sin, the problem of evil, the evolution of consciousness, the nature of power, grace and mental illness, the myth of Orestes, resistance to grace, the welcoming of grace. So I have really enjoyed this book. Similarly to the Pema Chodron book, When Things Fall Apart, and The Power of Now, this is a book that I read in small sections and then let it sink in, highlighting the passages that I really want to meditate on and think deeply on, or that I want to be able to look back on. And then I wait a little bit until I come back to it. So this is not something that I'm reading like a memoir or a educational book. It's really in parts, slowly over time. I've been reading it for a couple months at least now. if not a few months, and I'm only like halfway through. So yeah, I read these kinds of books very differently. They're almost kind of like, I guess the same way you would read like a Bible or I don't know, a spiritual book, or, you know, in parts and not front to back in one sitting or a few sittings. I am enjoying this. I do recommend it. I don't like necessarily agree with everything he says, but that doesn't matter. That's not the point of these kinds of books. It's really to let in ideas from someone who has spent a long time thinking about these issues and these topics, and also I think is a practicing psychiatrist. Yeah, he was a psychiatrist. And letting it in and see if some of it resonates with you and letting it affect you in a positive way, especially if you want to grow and learn and evolve. I love these kinds of books, and I think this is worth reading if any of that sounded interesting to you. Yeah, those are the books that I'm currently reading. Oh, I have a couple on here too. Well, I'll just share one of them with you. I didn't think I was going to mention it, but I did mention that I was considering homeschooling. So another one that I have here is the John Holt book of homeschooling, Teach Your Own. This is another one that I'm currently reading. It's considered like, John Holt is considered like a classic homeschooling practitioner, author, speaker, thinker, and he's written a few books. He's now dead. Here it says he was born in 1923 and he died in 1985. And so he also wrote How Children Learn and How Children Fail. And here it says, yeah, the classic and indispensable work on teaching children at home, fully updated for today's new laws, new lifestyles, and the growing new generation of homeschooling parents. Except it's not, because it's like written, when was it? It's no longer, you know, even though it's still relevant in a lot of ways, it's no longer up to date in that sense, because I think it was written in 2003. So yeah, a long time ago now. But it is very interesting. A lot of it is, so far, where I am, is the philosophy of education, of homeschooling that he has, and of unschooling. Again, it's very interesting to see what resonates, what maybe doesn't resonate, and learn from someone who spent his whole life looking at this and thinking about this, you know. So here you have the table of contents, why take them out, common objections to homeschooling, which was interesting too, because there's a lot, and he went through all of them. And some of those were really interesting to hear the responses, because they really resonated, and they were like, oh, that's exactly what I've been thinking. It's really validating to hear him say it and explain it that way, you know. The politics of unschooling, living with children, learning in the world, living in working spaces, serious play, learning without teaching, learning difficulties, children and work, homeschooling in America, how to get started, and school response. So I am not very far in this book, but so far it's interesting, and I really just wanted to read it because it's supposedly a classic, you know. So something like The Brave Learner is not a classic, but I'm sure The Brave Learner was influenced by John Holt or Julie Bogart, you know what I mean? So I want to read the originals too. And I do have other books on education and stuff, because I studied, partly in university, I studied early childhood development and education. So I do have content on that already. And also in my family, my grandmother was a teacher and founded a school, an alternative school. So we had a lot of education books as well, some of which I have with me now that are going to be interesting to read as well. But this is what I'm reading right now from the library. Next, what I'm looking forward to reading, we have More Than a Body. Your Body is an Instrument, Not an Ornament. An indispensable resource for women of all ages. This is a guide to help us better connect to ourselves, to value ourselves, to love ourselves, and ultimately to be ourselves. This is a book that I got at the bookstore at the same time as I got the book on, what was it? The Road Less Traveled. And I haven't started reading this yet, but I'm looking forward to reading it. I've had it for many months now, but I haven't started it yet. I am feeling compelled to read this. I'll just read the table of contents. Rising with Body Image Resilience, Critiquing and Creating Your Media Environment from self-objectification to self-actualization, from divided to united as women, reclaiming health and fitness for yourself, and a resilient reunion. So I was initially kind of compelled to read this because I have been dealing with very intense body image issues for the last couple of years that just kind of have reared their ugly head that I hadn't been dealing with for many years beforehand. Growing up, I definitely did, and I have a past of pretty serious eating disorder issues and body image issues that, while I wouldn't say like fully resolved, I would say like 80% resolved, or I thought were resolved about a decade ago, gradually, and a lot of things have made it so that has changed. So partly I removed my breast implants that were making me very sick a couple of years ago, and I still have processing to do around that. I've done a lot of it on my own privately, but I kind of want to express some things about that as well, both about the reasons I got the implants, and then also how it kind of changed my body image, and it changed it in a way that makes it hard to come back to your older self, but it's not really your older self because now you have new scars and you'll never have your old self back. You'll never have your pre-cut up self back. It goes deep. My healing, my grieving is multifactorial here, but there's a lot of levels to it, but there's a lot of stuff there that has made it so that also some things that I hadn't dealt with back then when I got the implants have kind of like come back now in a new way. I'm also dealing with the fact and all of that kind of like made my whole body, like made me see my whole body differently. Like I didn't realize how much the implants had kind of made me see the rest of my body differently too, and actually had made me more kind of accepting of other parts of my body that were less perfect. And my body's changed a lot in the last 10 years. I got very, very fit. I got very lean. Then I got breast implants. I felt like I had the perfect body, to be honest. Like I felt amazing. Whatever the perfect body is, I felt like that's what I had, and I definitely got that validation, And then I got pregnant. I gained a lot of weight when I was pregnant, and I kind of just thought that I wouldn't. I just thought I was so fit and healthy that I would be fine, but I wasn't. I mean, I was fine. I was healthy through my pregnancy. I had no issues, but I gained a lot of weight, like too much weight. And of course, that left me with a lot of stretch marks. I think I would have gotten stretch marks anyway because I get stretch marks very, very easily, but more than I would have if I had gained less weight, and also a lot of saggy skin, like because now I've lost the weight, and the weight that came off from the inflammation and stuff from the implants I've gotten rid of. So I mean, the last time I talked about this, I lost like 26 pounds or something. I've lost about 45 pounds, you guys, in the last year and a half, almost 2 years. So I've lost a considerable amount of weight since I got rid of the implants. I have a lot of loose skin now. I have lots of scarring. I'm getting older. Now I have lines on my face, Simultaneously, we live in an age where plastic surgery is almost celebrated. It's not just tolerated. I would say it's almost kind of welcomed with open arms. And I'm trying to live a life where not only do I want to live a very authentic life, no shade to other people, but to me it doesn't feel very authentic to constantly try to like keep my body or face stuck in a certain time, or more so just like kind of direct my energies there. I don't want to do that. At this point, I feel like it's more harmful to me than anything else. And not just to me, I just think in general, like I want to see more natural people around me. Like I am depressed about seeing so much filtered stuff around me, so much, not just filtered. I mean, filtering is one thing, but actually physically changing your body with plastic surgery. Anyway, this could be a whole topic in itself, and I probably will make a video on it at some point. I don't want to get too much into it, but suffice to say, like I'm dealing with all of these bodily changes, and some of them are natural, like just the aging thing, while I also know that I'm going to be one of those women who does not get Botox. I'm not going to get the fillers. I'm not going to get the Botox. I'm not going to get the lifts and the tucks and whatever. I have considered maybe eventually one day it's like, maybe I'm like, oh, what if a tummy tuck, or I don't know, because when I say I have loose skin, I have a lot of loose skin, but I don't even know. I don't even know. But I'm talking more so like especially on the face and everything, I'm going to age naturally. I would say 99.9% sure. I don't know why that would change, but never say never or anything. But it's pretty much never. I don't think I would ever get anything done on my face, especially nothing that has to do with toxins or anything injected in your face. My battery died. So, okay, anyway, where was I? Simultaneously, while I'm having like kind of negative body image more so, and at an intense degree when I was feeling really good about my body for like most of the last decade. Simultaneously, I'm also noticing that I'm aging in my face, you know? I am starting to get, I don't know if you want to call them, I don't know if fine lines are the euphemism. I don't think they're not wrinkles, like deep wrinkles or anything, but I'm having those changes, you know, happen on my face that are inevitable. And simultaneously, I'm seeing around me people have kind of embraced plastic surgery as almost like a normal basic maintenance thing. And it's just normal for people now to get Botox and injections and lip plumper and jaw stuff and all this stuff that I'm not going to do. And so I've simultaneously been kind of like wrestling with the idea that as other people look quote unquote more perfect, I'm gonna like deteriorate for lack of a better word right now. And I mean, everyone always kind of did, but I think we live in an age where people are just they're not aging the same way. And I've just been realizing that I've wrapped up so much of my own identity as a woman in my appearance, and I think that's pretty common for women. I think that is kind of offered to us as a point of power and identity when we are little girls, you know, like your power also lies in your beauty, in your youth, in your body. And even if you don't outrightly embrace that or submit to that, I do think it kind of seeps in, and it kind of seeped in more than I thought it did for myself. And so I've just kind of been wrestling with that. And so I thought that this book would be interesting because, you know, exactly that's what I'm trying to see it more. Your body is an instrument, not an ornament. And I want to embrace aging not as a deterioration process, which apparently people think it is, you know what I mean? So it's hard. That messaging is strong, you know, that like you can't have wrinkles. You shouldn't have wrinkles. You should have this taut, smooth, bouncy, plump skin for as long as possible. And I mean, I do everything that I naturally can do for that. You know, I'm very healthy. I exercise, I eat healthily, I drink a lot of water, I do full skincare routines too, but there's only so much that's going to do. I'm still going to age. And even I see it, you know, when I see even like peers on YouTube, I'm not naming any names, but just I can see the work that people have had done, like. And I think it is noticeable because there is like this Instagram face ideal. I started noticing it a lot with filters, you know, and I used those filters at a certain point on Instagram, on the Instagram that's connected to this channel. And I felt really uncomfortable about it after a while because I was like, wow, something has happened where now I feel like I can't be my unfiltered self. Like, what is that? Like, at first it was fun and cool and cute to be able to like put on this filter that kind of makes me look like a Russian supermodel or something. But after a while it became that, oh wait, everyone's using these filters, and now I feel like I look ugly without the filter, whereas in the past I wouldn't have thought that. I thought I would look normal and fine. And so I just stopped posting because I was like, well, I don't want to post myself with the filters because it feels inauthentic to me and wrong too, because I'm perpetuating what I think is kind of like a social media disease at this point. But at the same time, I feel like I look ugly, and like I feel like I don't like what I look like. And everywhere I see, like, mostly people are using the filters. Not only are people using the filters, but now what I've noticed is they will use the filters, like film themselves with the filters on their camera, and then like upload the video and then re-upload it so that you can't see that they used a filter. But like, I'm not stupid, other people are not stupid. We can tell the filters all tend to do the same thing, which is like narrowing your jaw, narrowing your nose, plumping your lips, and turning your eyes a little bit upwards at the corner and making them kind of cat eye. And of course, the smoothing of the skin.
Trying to do a video where you see that this is not my face. It's supposed to be just freckles. It's not. It's also bigger lips, smaller nose, bigger upturned eyes. So this is this angle right here of my face, but with the filter. And this is the exact same angle of my face with no filter. Is this ugly? Is this, are my lips too small? Is my nose too big? Are my eyes not upturned and cat eye enough? Am I not tanned enough? That's what these filters do.
So they're ubiquitous on social media, and they're all pretty much the same features, which is the Instagram face. It's the snatched face. And more people are getting these procedures in real life. And I mean, I'm in real life, I'm such a low maintenance person at this point. Since the pandemic, I don't even wear makeup regularly, and I've always been kind of low maintenance. It's funny because like I joke like that I got breast implants, but that I've never had a nail appointment. You know what I mean? Like I barely get my hair cut or hair done. I'm trying now, like once a year maybe. I'm trying, or once every year and a half, 2 years. It's not great, but I'm pretty low maintenance. I really like to take care of myself. I have, oral hygiene, exercise, fitness, health, like that. But in terms of like maintenance work that people do, like getting their nails done, getting their hair done, getting their lashes done, I've never done those things. I've never had my lashes done. I've never had my nails done. I've never had my hair done. I the first time I had it like professionally done was last year when I had those videos at Christmas, and I had my hair done for the first time with like highlights, and that was nice, but it's definitely like high maintenance and costs a lot, and I'm not used to doing that. Like I don't think that I ever will. It's just never been part of my lifestyle. But I know that it's very normal for a lot of people. And so I just kind of witnessed that, going from getting your hair done to then getting your nails done regularly, which started in like the 2010s. Suddenly everyone since the 2010s gets their nails done. Yes, I don't have great nails, but they're healthy. Like I don't get my nails done, but they're healthy and clean, and it's nice. It's fun to do your own nails at home, and I've wanted to get them done at a salon before, but I can't justify the price. I don't know. Maybe it's because I didn't grow up around that either, like with anyone in my family doing that, so it just didn't come naturally. Yeah, I've never had like my lashes done. I would have, and like I say that because not as a judgment, but just it's never been something that I've ever done. Like I've wanted to before, but I've never gone ahead and spent the $80 or the whatever amount money, because it never made sense to me. I just wore makeup, just regular makeup, which seems so low maintenance now when I see how high maintenance you have to be, the full maintenance Instagram person with the hair and the nails and the lashes, and now the plastic surgery. And I say now the plastic surgery because now it's become that, people maintain their faces with all these procedures and stuff every couple months or yearly or whatever it is. And anyway, part of the reason I'm never going to do that anyways, because I understand now that I don't ever want to jeopardize my actual health also physically, which the breast implants absolutely did. So never again will I do something like that to my body. That I can say, never again. Like, even though it's been hard, sometimes I would look at wanting to put implants back in, even though I never would, because it ruined my life. So anyway, More Than a Body, interested in reading this. I talked about this way too long, but there you go. I have a lot to say about this topic. I screenshot the following on Facebook at some point because it spoke to me. Maybe it will for you too. When we are young, we want to look older. And when we are old, we want to look younger. And there's a window in the middle of it all when we're supposed to look as we wish. But we waste that time wishing we were taller or thinner or curvier. Our hair was longer or shinier, curlier. Parts of our body were firmer and perkier. And we'd started to use anti-wrinkle cream earlier. And by the time we realized we were perfect just as we were, the window is closed. It is too late. Too late to realize that all those things never really mattered in the first place. But it's never too late to start letting go, to stop wanting, stop wishing. It's never too late to accept yourself, to look in the mirror and realize that all along, you never needed to look older or younger or anything else. You just needed to look like you. Becky Hemsley, 2023. And I'm interested in reading this. Let me know if you have read this. It looks interesting. Oh, here it says at the bottom, at the top, positive body image isn't believing that your body looks good. It's knowing your body is good regardless of how it looks. So there you go. That's what I want. Then I also want to read Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. I really want to read his other books too. I have not read them yet, but I love what he has to say about trauma and healing and children, and almost everything that he says and talks about is worth listening to and worth considering. Yeah, I really want to read this. If you've read this, let me know. Let me see if there's a table of content. So we have our interconnected nature, the last place you want to be, facets of trauma, living in an immaterial world, emotions, health, and the body-mind unity. You rattle my brain, our highly interpersonal biology, everything I'm surrounded by, dispatches from the new science, mutiny on the body, the mystery of the rebellion's immune system. I can barely read now, you guys. Like, my eyes are just not good right now. The mystery of the rebellious immune system. It ain't a thing. Disease as process. A traumatic tension. Attachment versus authenticity. Part 2, the distortion of human development. Who are we really? Human nature, human needs. A study on fragile foundation children's ears. A sturdy or fragile, I cannot read right now, holy crap. A sturdy or fragile foundation, children's irreducible needs, trouble at the threshold before we come into the world. What choices do I have? Childbirth in a medicalized culture, horticulture on the moon, parenting undermined, forcing the brain in the wrong direction, the sabotage of childhood, a template for distress, how culture builds our character. Part 3, rethinking abnormal afflictions as adaptations, just not to be you, debunking the myths about addiction. Show of hands, a new view of addiction, an inaccurate map of our pain, what we get wrong about mental illness. The mind can do some amazing things, from madness to meaning. Part 4, the toxicities of our culture, from society to cell, uncertainty, conflict, and loss of control, robbing the human spirit, disconnection, and its discontents. They just don't care if it kills you. Sociopathy as strategy, the assaulted sense of self, how race and class get under the skin, society's shock absorbers, why women have it worse. We feel their pain, our trauma-infused politics. Part 5, pathways to wholeness. Mind in the lead, the possibility of healing. 4 A's and 5 compassions, some healing principles. A dreadful gift, disease as teacher. Before the body says no. First steps on the return to self. Seeing is disbelieving, undoing self-limiting beliefs. Foes to friends, working with the obstacles to healing. Jesus in the tip, psychedelics and healing. My life as a genuine thing, touching spirit. Unmaking a myth, visioning a saner society. So, yeah, excited to read this one. Let me know if you've read it. And then finally, I have no voice left. I want to read Johann Hari's Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And yeah, I was interested in reading this because I think that this is a very relevant issue right now for the world, for myself, for most people. And yes, a lot of it has to do with social media, but I do want to be able to have my undivided attention again, to be able to sink deeply into parts of my life without having my mind scattered or divided amongst many different people, thoughts, things at the same time. I don't want to be multitasking all the time. And I really enjoyed Johann Hari's Lost Connections, and I did want to read Chasing the Scream as well, but Lost Connections was so good. I got that from the library, and I definitely would like to have it permanently in my collection. I would like to reread it. That was about depression, but as you can gather from the title, Lost Connections, it's also about our loss of community as being one of the main factors behind depression. And he's a really good writer, which is not always the case for these more educational or science-based books. Sometimes you just read it for the information and it's dry and hard to read, but you read it because the information is really, really good and really interesting and all of that. But Johann Hari is actually a really good writer, very compelling writer, uses storytelling in his writing, and you just get sucked in. So like Lost Connections, for example, was a book that was very enjoyable to read. Like, I got a lot out of it, but I also enjoyed reading it. And so I'm hoping that that will be the same thing for Stolen Focus. I think he just recently wrote a book that's coming out that's all about Ozempic, actually. But here it says, there you go. Johann Hari writes like a dream. He's both a lyricist and a storyteller. Just like what I said, actually. But also, just like what I said, he's a storyteller. But also an indefatigable investigator of one of the world's greatest problems, the systematic destruction of our attention. Read this book to save your mind. An indefatigable? Like, oh my god, how do you say that? Indefatigable. 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 Investigator. Anyway, I don't know anyone thinking more deeply or more holistically about the crisis of our collective attention than Johann Hari. This book could not be more vital. I don't know if it's Johann. I think it's probably Johann Hari. Please sit with it and focus. So anyway, those were a couple recommendations there by some famous people. But I look forward to reading this. I haven't started it yet. I need to get on it because it's a library book and I have limited time to read it. But I am reading my other dozens of books at the same time. So for now, it's there. By the way, these are a couple of my favorite books. Here you have The Glass Castle by Jennette Wells. That is a memoir that is superb. Love that memoir. And that is a memoir that also sat on my shelf for literally 20 years before I picked it up. Whenever it came out. When did it come out? Yeah. There you go. Almost 20 years because I had it. It was bought when it was new. 2005. So almost 20 years. Not quite. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Hanya Yanagihara, I think. A Little Life. Huge book. Brutal story. Like all the trigger warnings that you could possibly have. But really, really good. Definitely made me cry. That's pretty rare to have a book make you cry. It made me cry. Very, very, very sad. Very brutal. When you think it can't get more brutal, it gets more brutal. And it is fiction, but it reads like it could be a true story. It is a very long read. Like, it's over 800 pages. It's probably one of the longest books I've ever read. I mean, I think some people thought it was overwritten. I've seen reviews where people said it should have been edited down, but I really don't think so. Like, I think everything in it needed to be said. I didn't think there was anything redundant or unimportant. Everything fit, and it's an epic story of this friendship between 4 boys. Is it 4 or 3? Yeah, 4 college classmates. But one of them, and it's over the span of many, many decades. Well, basically until one of them, like their whole life, basically. And one of them, though, however, is hiding a really, really traumatic upbringing and childhood that you get to know in this book. So, yeah. Very dark, brutal, very good, and will make you perhaps sob. But I definitely recommend A Little Life. And I've already talked about My Dark Vanessa, which, funnily enough, like, I love this book, and I feel like I have to reread it because I don't remember it a lot, but I know that I loved it, and I even did a video reviewing it years ago when I read it. So anyway, there you go. That is what I have to share with you today. This was a lot longer than I thought it would be. So if you enjoyed, if you listened and watched, thank you for being here. I hope you got something out of it. Let me know if there's anything that you're reading right now that you think that I would really like, now that you kind of know what I like to read, or some of what I like to read, even if there's something that you really want to share with me or share with other people who are reading the comments that doesn't, fall in any of the categories I've shared, definitely just share it, and maybe just share why it's impacted you, or why you think it's an important read. And thank you so much for being here. Till we see each other again, take care of yourself, and I'll see you soon. Bye.